Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to this week's edition of Loop Live. So glad that you're here. My name is Matt McCoy. I'm the founder of loopcommunity.com, and I'm the host of the Loop Live show. Today, we have a very special guest with us today, Aaron Williams. He's an artist and songwriter with the Worship Initiative, and I'm looking forward to digging into topics about leading worship and all the things that it has to do with, leading and, taking care of your church and volunteers. And we like to just dive into a lot of questions on this show. If you are watching this live, type in the comments any question you have during our discussion. We like it to be a conversation. We might even take some questions live. So if you're watching on YouTube, Facebook, type down in the chats your question. We might take a live one. And I'm excited about this conversation with Aaron. So without further ado, let's bring in Aaron Williams. Hey, Aaron, how's it going, man?
Hey, Matt, doing well. Thank you guys for having me today.
Yeah, good to see you, man. I'm glad to have you on the show today. Tell us a little bit about your background. So what are you doing with the Worship Initiative?
Yeah, I came on the team here in Dallas, Texas. I'm from Arkansas originally and have been there honestly my whole life until this point. And moved here a year ago to join the team as a songwriter and artist. So I help with the Worship Initiative's resourcing and recording stuff, as well as just released my first project on the label side of the Worship Initiative. So yeah, it's been a busy, fun, transitional last year for us, but we're loving where we're at, what we're getting to do.
Did your album drop already?
Yeah, August 5th. So I guess it's 2 weeks old on Friday.
That's awesome, man. All
Yeah.
right, and I'm guessing that we for sure are getting all the tracks for that. If not, we already have them. I'm not even sure. I haven't even looked. Do
Yes,
we
they're
have the
up.
tracks? We have
They're
them.
there. Yep. The whole
Awesome.
album's there. Yep.
Killer. All right. Well, I want to talk about your album at the end,
Yep.
but that's really great. Everybody, make sure you go listen to the album's called "The Hope of Christ," and we have all the tracks on Loop Community. So that's great. So, Aaron, we like to dig right down to it in these interviews and
Yeah.
get to issues and topics that are very interesting to worship leaders. These are all thoughts that, if you're a worship leader full time at a church, if you've done this for a while, these are all kind of ideas and thoughts that like pop in people's
Yep.
heads. And I think it's just interesting to kind of dig into it. I was looking at your Instagram and you posted this quote on Instagram that I'd love to talk about and unpack a little bit about. So the quote was, and I'm not sure if this was your quote or someone else's, but if people show up to church this week looking for entertainment, it will be a good thing if they leave a little bit disappointed. So first, can you just break down what you mean by leaving disappointed? What does that mean exactly?
Yeah. Well, I should have known if I post something on Instagram, it was going to come back a
Yep.
conversation.
Yep.
I mean, it might be helpful. The context of me posting that was just me prepping for, I think it was a Friday or Saturday that I posted that. And it was just me like going through some of my normal routines of like preparing myself. I was out on a run. I was thinking about Sunday morning. I was praying toward it. And I have just had this recurring thought
Yeah.
for months of like, gosh, sometimes it feels like the best thing that I could give to people is a little bit of a disappointment to them. And then I started asking myself, why? Why is that? And so that's where the whole thought of like, I know I come to church with my own personal expectations at times that are
Yeah.
probably a little bit different than what the church is meant to be. And so I think what I'm getting at with talking about disappointment would be that gap between my personal expectation or yours or any of our personal expectation that we're bringing into a worship service and the church's biblical mission or mandate. And when there's a gap or a difference between those two things,
Hmm.
and in this particular post, I'm talking about if my intention was like to be entertained the whole time, then I think it's actually maybe the most loving thing that the church could do or that the leaders in the church could do to disappoint that expectation a little bit and
Yeah.
remain faithful to what its actual mission is, which would be
Yeah.
for sure to glorify God and also to make disciples, to help us grow deeper in our spiritual walks. And so, you know, the idea of that we live in an entertainment culture, I feel like is not really even that debated anymore. It's like we all kind of know that that's a
Mhm.
part of the reality. And what I perceive as a worship leader is oftentimes there's a direct opposing, maybe the best way to say it is like what's best for my spiritual growth. And entertainment culture is oftentimes like directly opposing that. And
Yeah.
so that quote is me just kind of trying to work through those own, feelings and prayers. And it's as much for myself about trying to get my expectation correct and in alignment with the scriptures when I'm going to
Yeah.
church and figuring out how to lead people.
That's a good point in that I do think that maybe that quote, from my perspective reading it, it actually is more about the worship leader or the person planning the service than it is about the people coming. Because
Yeah.
I don't know actually how often people are really coming to church for entertainment.
Mhm.
But I do think that sometimes the people who are planning the church service, the worship leader, we have
Yep.
this feeling inside of like, we need to put together a service or a set list that's going to be entertaining in a way.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah,
almost
totally.
maybe a battle more for us than it is for the people coming.
That's a
Because
good
I'm just
point.
thinking about even like some of my friends who I'm a part of a new church plant, and some of my friends who are coming, like I don't think they're actually coming because they want me to entertain them. I do think they're coming because they want to be fed and they do want to experience God
Mm.
and to
Yeah.
practice going to church. And I don't think they're actually looking for entertainment, but I might feel that pressure, which is an unnecessary pressure
Yeah.
completely. And it's not even the right job description, really. My job is not to
Yeah.
entertain them. So
Yeah, no,
maybe
that's
it's almost
that's
that I need to be disappointed in a way, you know?
yeah, and that's I mean, that's how I came to it myself was
Yeah.
was feeling that sometimes I'm wanting to lead in ways or like you said, it's an undue pressure, but I do think a lot of worship leaders feel that, like, man, what if it's not good enough today? Or what if it's
Yeah.
not engaging enough? And I found myself just asking the simple question of like, especially when we would come to moments where we were going to have like an extended time of prayer in service.
Yeah.
And I would go, I would be thinking, like, man, is that going to be too boring for people? And then the next thought I would have is, yeah, but like, don't we have a responsibility to like teach people to pray?
Yeah.
And I don't know anyone who works in a church who wouldn't agree that we have some responsibility to help people pray,
Yeah.
but we all also know if you've ever tried to grow in prayer, like it's the opposite of entertaining.
Yeah.
It can feel boring, it can feel tiring, it can feel scattered.
Yeah.
And so just wrestling with that tension,
Yeah.
that's yeah, that's a lot where it came from.
Another practical tension in that would be maybe playing hymns. We
Mhm.
maybe want to play like the coolest, newest, biggest song right now, but it
Yep.
may not have a lot of rich content in it. But we know that like, some old hymns do. And
Yep.
but sometimes we're like, yeah, but that's gonna be boring. We don't want to just like play like an old hymn. That's gonna be put people to sleep or whatever. And how do you have
Yeah,
that balance? Do you think it's possible, Aaron, to actually have both? Could you
I do.
actually entertain and have substance?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's almost like a tightrope, or you're like walking on if you've ever like gone hiking and you're walking on the top of the mountain and like, there's a ridge on both sides. That's what it feels like to me, where you're trying to be good communicators, whether it's worship leaders, pastors, anyone up front leading, they keep our attention and there's a story being told and we're engaged in what's happening,
Hmm.
but there's that fine line of when that goes too far. And so it feels like that's the constant tension of trying to lead well, but not lead in a way that then actually deprives people of, in the hymn example of like
Yeah.
singing a song that maybe doesn't have as much of a emotional arc, but
Hmm.
is intentionally not trying to be that. It's like, yeah,
Yeah.
we need those moments, I think.
Yeah. Something that really stuck with me from a church I used to be on staff at. was they used to say that, like, listen, when it comes down to it, if there's ever a battle between content of a song versus the style of a song, content always wins.
Yeah.
Now, ideally, in a perfect world, you could have a song that has both. It has great style, it's a great song musically, but it also has rich content. Ideally, you'd have both. But if
Yep.
it ever came down to a battle between the two, content wins. Um,
Hmm.
and that's something that's always really stuck with me, because there's been times when there's been a really, you know, current song out that doesn't say anything. And it's like, yeah, this
Yeah.
might feel like a really good song to start the service with. Like, it feels good, it sounds good, it gets people excited and pumped, but it says nothing. And
Yeah.
I've actually had to battle that in my worship planning and be like, you know what? I'm going to choose not to do that song
Yeah. I mean, that's
because
the
it doesn't
exact
say anything.
Yeah, that's the exact tension that I'm talking about, in that post is just like you're probably feeling that like but but this other song might not grab people in quite the same way.
Yeah.
And you have a decision to make there. And I think, my encouragement to myself and to other leaders is exactly what you just said. Like sometimes we need to let ourselves down or let out that pressure of like I've got to, or I feel like I've got to entertain, or
Hmm.
every moment of the service has to just capture people's emotion in the highest way.
Yep. Yep. So you also talked about how we need the courage to be unimpressive. How can churches balance putting their best foot forward and having everything sound great and look great, while also having the focus on Jesus and not just having a performance every Sunday?
Yeah, that line, the courage to be unimpressive. That was one of those lines. Again, as I'm like working this out in my own life, it kind of came out of me, and then I responded to what I wrote down. Um,
Hmm.
And I thought, wow, something about
Yeah.
that phrase, having the courage to be unimpressive, is resonating really deeply inside of me. And so again, I'm starting to ask myself the question, like, why is that? And I think in the same way of how we just talked about, maybe as worship leaders, we carry this inner turmoil of feeling like we have to entertain people. I think we also can carry this expectation on ourselves that we have to be impressive.
Hmm.
And that the thought of being impressive is really more of an inner posture that kind of operates under this assumption that I have to be something really special
Hmm.
in order to be loved or accepted. And so I think there's something really powerful about learning as leaders how to become comfortable in our own skin and not like over function in the role of worship leader. And I use
Hmm.
that term over function. That's just like a psychological term that it's typically used when we're talking about a person. So let's say I take on the responsibility of other people around me. And I think
Hmm.
in a worship context is when, if I take on the responsibility of having to try to control how everyone else responds,
Hmm.
then I am moving into an over functioning role as a leader in the church. And so
Yeah.
it's like that same balance of like, how do I serve people? How do I plan well, prepare well, but then get there and realize that I don't actually control how all of these people respond, and I really don't even need to. It would if I do that
Yeah.
too much, like now I'm beginning to overfunction, and I think there's something in that that requires an innate humility, an innate sense of like being okay with who we are as leaders, and
Hmm.
like operating from a groundedness, that
Yeah.
we're not enough in the sense of like we could never be the perfect worship leader for everyone, but we are
Yep.
enough in the sense of like we are who God's made us to be, and we play a particular role, and so we can settle into that spot. And I
Yeah.
think there's a sweet spot there, but just like we're talking about, it's like easier said than done.
Yeah. That is a tricky one. And it almost is like an issue of a too high of a view of self-importance, of
Uh-huh.
maybe that we're controlling the situation, or that I know that they need us in a way, or but also wanting to look good in front of other people, and it really is a
Yeah.
pride issue, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I mean, as I was thinking about this, I was just thinking about like if you were just to take a sample of worship music right now, like
Hmm.
a, a majority of the songs they're big, they're long, they're longer. So it's
Yeah.
like comparatively to 10 years ago, our songs are bigger, our songs are longer, our songs have more self-expression.
Hmm.
And I don't think any of those things are bad things. I'm glad that that exists in our expression, but it's just like there's more there, you know? And so I started asking myself the question of like, I know I'm going to lead some of those songs. I know I'm going to have some moments where I'm like a 10 out of 10 on the energy scale. But are there other moments where I'm exhibiting self control and I want to say something, but I choose not to?
Mm.
Or I think about going back into that bridge again and I choose not to. And for me personally, there were far fewer moments where I was actually saying no and
Yeah.
governing myself.
Yeah.
And that's where it came down to like, okay, it's actually in this day, the courageous move for me is not to sing the extra bridge or the spontaneous chorus where
Hmm.
10 years ago it felt like that was the move of courage. Like
Yeah.
now for me personally, and I know this might not be true for everyone, but for me the courageous move is to be quiet instead of loud at times,
Yeah.
or to show restraint in
Yeah.
my leadership, you know, to
Yeah.
give people space to pray instead of filling it with words, you know.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, you know, again, I encourage all of us to like really think about some of those kind of courageous steps that are kind of counterintuitive. You know, it's not always bigger, louder, longer. Like the spirit could be leading you to say less and to
Yeah.
create space for people.
Yeah. That's so good, man. I there's a guy I used to work with, had a huge impact on my worship leading theology in a way. His name's Andy
Yeah.
Rozier, and he has a
Yeah.
whole thing on how worship leaders should be like tour guides. And literally there are probably 10 different points on this topic of that worship leaders should be like a tour guide. But one of those points that kind of goes along with what we're talking about is that if you're a tour guide and you're giving people a tour of the Taj Mahal, right? And you're showing them around, and you're like, hey, look at this, it's beautiful, blah blah blah, and you're like walking them around. What you don't want is for at the very very end of the tour guide says, hey, so what'd you guys think of the Taj Mahal? And they were like, it was all right, but man, that tour guide was awesome. He looked so
Exactly.
cool. His voice was great. He explained everything perfectly to us. Man, that tour guide was amazing. Yeah, but what about the Taj Mahal? Like, eh. And as worship leaders, we don't want that to happen. Like, you do not want
Totally.
people leaving church being like, "Oh, that worship leader was awesome," and they're not even like thinking at all like about how did they experience God. And
Yeah. Yeah.
so,
Yeah. No, that's a great, I'm gonna log that away because that's a great way of talking about it. And I do think it would be awesome if more of our worship services, you know, exactly like you're saying, like we walked away more mesmerized by you know, what the text of that morning was revealing to
yeah,
us, or how the song led us, you know, closer to the heart of God.
yeah,
And the tricky part is God does use us. You know, He uses worship leaders, He uses pastors and other people to like to lead the tour, you know,
hmm,
so to speak. But we're not supposed to be the point. And
yeah,
I think that, you know, to come back to the quote, I think it's like it feels to me like it's taking more courage as a leader to say a few things and then to just let people gaze
yeah,
and
yeah,
not fill all the space.
yeah,
Like I'm having to like, you know, think about that and pray about that in order to
yeah,
do that well, because there's a certain pressure that I feel. I don't, some of you may feel the same thing of like there's a pressure to fill the space and
yeah,
to sing more notes in the gaps and things like that. And there are times where that's the exact thing that we need to do, but not all the times.
yeah. I love that, man. I love that whole thought. It takes humility and it takes courage. to be
Yeah.
unimpressive. And we have to just challenge ourselves on that every single week. Do you think that worship services should be more stripped down? Or is there a way to have Christ focused worship while still utilizing technology?
Yeah.
Sometimes I think that we are like over tech at the church. Everything's automated, lyrics, lighting, fog machines, and it just looks super slick. Some church services look like a touring act. Like if you were going to like some concert, they look just as good
Yeah.
and sound just as good as that. Do you think that there's there a healthy balance there? Have we gone too far? Are we too behind? What do you think?
Yeah. I mean, it's such a great question. I mean, I have two thoughts that come to my mind. One is I think I think these types of decisions are always best made not like one decision that just blanket covers every church in the world, you know?
Hmm.
And like, but to really think about each local community, and every
Yep.
church doesn't have to look the same. But I would almost to come back to the very first part of this conversation. It's like, but what is the goal? And I think if the goal is Christ likeness and that the church is becoming more like Christ as it worships him, it's pointing to him, he's the focus, then I think you can begin to answer that question in ways of like, how does this piece of technology, this lighting equipment, this way of structuring our service, how does it serve that end goal?
Hmm.
And I think it's very possible that different churches come to different conclusions based on their city, based on, the type of people that they have.
Yeah.
And so I think, speaking contextually is important. I would say on a broad scale, like maybe the best thing that was ever spoken to me on this was just when you're thinking of technology by and large, it's like technology is a great servant, but a terrible master.
Hmm.
And it's kind of back to this idea of like when, let's just say you're a lighting director or designer, when it begins to come, like when the point of your work that week begins to become about how many people are commenting on how great the lights were, I think
Hmm.
that's like a yellow flag to
Yeah.
go, okay, like the lights in this service are becoming the master. They're becoming the focal
Hmm.
point, not 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 a like a servant to the greater end,
Yep.
and
Yep.
that could be with lighting, that could be with, I mean, I feel like that can be with the size of
Yeah.
your band,
Yeah.
and it's like at times when I've felt like that, I've just started to strip it down and like, man, we're gonna go with guitar and keys for the
Yeah.
next few weeks just because
Yeah.
we've got to get back to the center here. So,
I Can I just say
yeah,
something there?
please
Another
do.
example of that, of a yellow flag, is when there's zero flexibility. So I
Yeah,
actually had a situation that popped in my mind just a couple months ago. I was leading worship at a church, and I had given them the set list ahead of time, gave them the song arrangement, you know. But then once we actually got into the weekend, the pastor was talking about something very different than what I originally thought. And I'm like, you know what?
yeah,
We're going to change the closing song to really match his sermon and to be like the fifth point, like, bam, we're going to sing the song. It's going to tie in perfectly to the sermon. And the pro presenter people were like, no, cannot do that. Cannot
mhm,
change. All the slides are set up. We cannot change that. The band had no problem with it. It was like an
yep,
easy song that we've done a million times, like Build My Life or something. Which, by the way,
yep.
I've actually personally said I'm done playing that song. I'm never playing Build My Life again. It's a great song, but I have way overplayed that song.
Yeah,
Anyways, anyways, so when there's zero flexibility, there was also something else where like just something in the middle of the set was like, you know what, we need to do like that chorus like two more times.
yep,
And I wanted to do that. And the pro presenter people were like, no, we cannot add two more choruses. The lighting cues are all set up. The pro
mhm,
presenter cues are all set up. And I'm like, guys, I think that's a major yellow flag on when
yes.
technology is dictating how the service is going to flow and what the needs of the people are. I think that's a problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, when you work backwards from that, you basically could come to the conclusion that like the technology, the way it looks has like on the priority list, it's just been like if, changing the song in order to match the moment, it's like that's below um, having that
Yeah.
technology set up in advance. And I think there's lots of things, those that's a great yellow flag. I think another yellow flag is like, again, anytime our debrief meetings, I don't know if your church is like our church did a debrief meeting on Monday, and there would be seasons where I would feel like, man, 90% of our debrief of Sunday is all production, how well it went according to planning center, or whatever,
Yeah.
like how close did it match what was on the plan. And
Yeah.
I think that's important, and it's definitely worth diving into all of that. But gosh, you want to see it have some balance to,
Hmm.
like, hey, we were able to, man, Matt in the moment saw that that ending song needed to change, and we changed it, and it went off without a hitch. And gosh, thank you guys for serving in that way. That's so much more of a healthy culture of like, technology's not driving the whole thing, but it's serving the whole thing. And I think that's where, like,
Yeah.
we need to keep those things in mind, and maybe like um, pastor our technicians in that, and have technicians who have that kind of value, because
Yeah.
I can see from a lighting perspective, if I've been working on those lighting cues all week, and then, the
Yeah.
worship leader wants to change it on Sunday morning, I can feel like, "Oh, no, don't do that."
Yeah.
But, I could also be pastored into understanding, yeah, but my cues aren't the point. We're here to serve these people. We think this is the move to make, and so let's
Yeah.
make it,
And that all goes back to the taking. It takes courage to be unimpressive. I really think that
Yep.
that ties into that. So let's change gears just a little bit, but I bet you anything we're going to find ways that this ties into what we're talking about being impressive
Yeah.
or entertaining. Actually, maybe more so on the entertaining piece. And my question is, what are your thoughts on churches live streaming their services and having services that are specifically for the live stream? So I think we can unpack this question actually a couple ways. Obviously with COVID, live streaming became something that was a necessity. We had to do it. You couldn't even go to church. So churches had to scramble to put their church online.
Yep.
Many of those churches have continued to stay on a live stream as well as in person services. However, some feedback that I've heard from churches is that fewer people are actually coming back to church
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
let's just face it, it's easier to sit at home on your couch with your own cup of coffee and your kids sitting behind you building blocks or whatever,
Mhm.
um, and watching church at home. And so you're not even going to church.
Yeah.
My first question for you is, do you think live streams are helpful in that currently, you know, post pandemic?
Mhm.
Although I guess people would say we're maybe in a pandemic now. I mean, I don't know. But do you think live streams are something that churches should have forever? Or should we
Yeah.
cut the live stream and get people back into church? That's a tough one.
It's hard. Yeah, it's a great question. Thanks for putting me like right on the spot with this one as well. The first answer I'll give is a little more of like how I would be thinking about this as a church leader, and then maybe I'll get into a little bit of my personal preference as well. Um, to me, where I really go with this question is, what is your church's theology of place, if I can say it that way, because that's where a lot of this comes down to is, do we value place? And what I
Mm-hmm.
mean by that, like, I think the scriptures, you see God blessing people, and you also see God blessing places, localities, churches, groups of people. And we know that He has chosen the local church to be His agent of renewal in the world and to carry on His mission in the world. And so, but we live in this modern moment where place is kind of fluid, And so, you and I are doing this interview from across the country.
Right.
And so place is not as important. But I do think, so I say that because anytime, in our church, like, we had people who were unable to come to the gatherings because of
Yeah.
sickness or old
Yeah.
age, things like that. And again, it's back, is this technology is serving those people. This
Yeah.
is this is the closest they can get to being in the place. So it's
Right.
incredibly helpful for those people. But just like we always have a propensity to do, we can take something that's a good thing and we take it too far or we make it ultimate. And then suddenly I'm sitting on my back porch every Sunday morning when I have the ability to get up and go to a local place.
Hmm.
And I'm just choosing, this is just a more convenient option for me. And that's where I do think it starts to get back into like, um, if it's that's a consumer way of viewing the church. The church is
Hmm.
offering a product that I'm consuming, and this is the easiest way for me to consume it, and so I don't even
Hmm.
have to get out of my PJs if I want to.
Yeah.
I think when it goes, and I do think that churches are experiencing some of that, and that's where I'm like, whether you decide to remove that, and I know churches locally and other churches in the country that have decided we're not going to do offer that anymore because we feel like that's unhealthy.
Hmm.
That's back to our first question. I feel like that's the church trying to say, I know you're going to be disappointed, but we actually feel like it's best if we invite you to come here.
Yeah.
I think that can be a wise move. Um, I probably lean that way personally, and
Hmm.
would I think there's some good in that. But I know a lot of fellow brothers and sisters of the faith who would hard disagree with me on that. And so I think to them, I would say, is there a way that you can offer that because that's your strong conviction, and you know this is not something that's like clear black and white in Scripture. Can you offer that, but can you like also really teach people the importance of being person to person with a local body of believers? And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
like if you're going to offer it, like own
Yeah.
up on teaching the
Yeah.
importance of place so that like you're
Yeah.
balancing that out, or at least calling people to the
Hmm.
biblical idea there. Does that make sense?
It totally makes sense. I think one argument of why people keep their live stream is that, well, we're reaching people who maybe wouldn't otherwise step foot in a church.
Totally.
But in my opinion, I think people are just as likely to actually hit your random YouTube live stream as they are to hit some random YouTube Bethel music video or a Spotify playlist or something. Like,
Yeah.
I think that, and the problem is that, okay, let's just say you do get someone who's going to watch your service, which I kind of like, okay, they watch your service, but they're not going to get the community aspect, which is what
Yeah.
really the church is about. And like being
Yep.
connected to a body of believers, people who know you, people who care about you and love you, ask you challenging questions, care about your
Mhm.
life. That is what you get by going to a church. So I can
Yeah.
see both sides of the discussion. I agree. I personally, I think if I were a pastor of a church, I would cut the live stream and I would only have the sermon available to listen to, maybe on a podcast or something, but days
Mhm.
later. So it's
Yeah.
not live, it's available days later. If you want to listen to it, you can. But I'm not giving away everything because I want people in the seats, not to be in the seats, but to experience the community that the church can give that you can really
Yeah.
only get there. So,
Yeah, and I mean, I think the why behind that you're describing is so important because the conversation oftentimes just comes down to, is it right or wrong to live stream?
mhm,
And if you were to stand on a stage and make your case biblically of what you just said, we we can't grow in isolation. We need one another. We've got to be in community with one another. And as inconvenient as it might be to like get up and go to someone's house or to come to this place, we believe like firmly that there is something about that we need. That's like giving people, it's back to the consumer mindset. It's not just removing, you can't have what you want. It's saying, but here's what we believe we really need, and so we're
yeah,
going to push into that. And
right.
so I would just love to see more churches, having that conversation, because that's what seems to be like at the crux of it, at least as
Yeah.
I can see it.
I would love to see more churches cut their live streams. That sounds like a crazy statement, but I just really do
No, I
think
don't.
that overall, for like the health of the believer, we should not be sitting on a couch watching church.
Yep.
Obviously, there's
Yep.
times when it's helpful, right? If you're like homesick or out of town and
Yep.
you missed your church, that's great. Those are definitely like good reasons for it, but I don't think it should be a complete replacement.
Yeah. Agree.
Okay, so to close up this conversation, which we have jumped all over the place here, let's talk
It's
about
been
your
good.
music. You just released your new album, The Hope of Christ.
Yeah.
Um, what song on that album do you think worship leaders should not miss? What is like your most favorite song? What's the one that you think, if you're going to tell people to go listen to this, go to this song first?
Go to the song "Abide." It's just been the song that no matter where I've led it, uh, multi-generational communities to youth gatherings, like it's
Yeah.
just the song that doesn't hasn't missed for me. And I think the reason is it's centered on the abiding passage in John 15. It's kind of a worship song for not just Sunday morning, but for like the other days of the week. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, I think if you had to listen to one song, that would be the one to listen to. I also think, there's just something like when you're looking at a catalog of worship songs, there's not a lot of great songs on that theme. And that's like a central theme to following Jesus, learning how to abide and remain in Him. So I just think maybe it's a helpful song for the church because it hits that niche of like, it's not an overplayed theme, but it's a helpful song to like really let your congregation come around that. And it's actually been really, I just think like a God thing. The last year and a half, that's how long the song's been out. It was on a previous project, smaller project. It's on this album. How many people have said to me, like, man, abiding, that's been the theme that the Lord just spoke to me, or that's my word for the year, or whatever. So
Hmm.
I don't know if, like, how, like, sometimes it seems like the Spirit is just doing a thing in the broader body of Christ. It
Yeah.
seems like maybe He's been doing something around that theme of like learning to remain in Him and abide. And so, yeah, that would be the one song. But I mean, I'd love for you to listen to the whole record, any artist would
Yeah.
say.
Yep. Everybody go check out this album. So what's cool is the song Abide is actually free on Loop
Yep.
Community right now until September 8th. So if you're
Yep.
watching this live, go get the tracks for free until September 8th. You can get Abide, listen to the album, The Hope of Christ, Apple Music, Spotify, I'm sure wherever music is, it's there. Aaron, I appreciate you taking the time, man. Thanks for kind of
Yeah.
diving into some deeper questions. We're trying to actually like tee up a little bit more harder questions, only because I think we're trying to get down just to the things that worship leaders are really thinking about and challenging people with.
Yeah.
And I just appreciate you going there with me. So
Yeah, well, thanks for going there, and I hope these conversations they just help us think about worship
yeah,
more critically in a good way,
yeah,
just to be more thoughtful leaders.
yeah. I think that's exactly it. Just to challenge ourselves to be thinking about it a little bit deeper. So
Yeah,
great to see you, man. Thanks for joining
yeah,
us.
you too. Thank you, man.
All right, you guys, I really enjoyed that interview with Aaron Williams. Make sure you go check out his album, The Hope of Christ, on Apple Music, Spotify. Also, get the tracks for free for Abide until September 8th. They're all at loopcommunity.com. I want you to type down in the chat what is one thing that really stood out to you about this interview. Type it down in the comments below. Make sure you hit the subscribe button so you stay tuned for future Loop Live events. We've got a lot of great interviews teed up for the fall season, so make sure you stay tuned and we'll see you next time. Thanks for being a part of the community.